My name is Lorraine Hayes. I'm 66 years old, a retired librarian from Plainfield, Illinois. And until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought I had already faced the worst life could throw at me. I'd lost my husband, Thomas, to a heart attack 8 years ago. I survived the loneliness of widowhood, the silence of a house built for two. I thought I understood grief. I was wrong. The day began like any other. At 3 o'clock sharp, I made my tea and set it on the little oak table by the window. Outside, the sky looked heavy, like the clouds were holding their breath. The local station murmured about a storm system tracking northeast, but in Illinois, we're used to storms. We know to watch, but we rarely panic. Then, at 5:15, the siren split the air. That long, terrible wail that shakes you right down to the bone. "Tornado on the ground," the announcer said, moving toward Will County. "Plainfield residents, take shelter immediately." My hands trembled as I rushed through the house. I grabbed what I could: my wedding album, Thomas's watch, my mother's quilt, a folder of insurance papers, 40 years of living. And this was all I could carry. I stumbled into the basement, clutching Thomas's old wool sweater to my chest. The house above me screamed, wood splintering, glass shattering, like the bones of our life were being ripped apart. And then came the roar, deafening, endless, like a freight train tearing straight through my living room. Then, silence. When I pushed open the basement door, the world I knew was gone. My kitchen table, gone. My roof, gone. The rose garden I tended for 20 years was nothing but shredded stems and broken petals. I cried then, for the first time since Thomas's funeral. Neighbors called my name, but they were broken too. The Red Cross spoke of shelters. But I needed something else. I needed family. I needed my son. I borrowed a neighbor's phone and dialed Michael. My hands shook as I whispered into the receiver, "Son, it's Mom. My house is gone." The next morning, I drove north on I-55 toward Chicago. The sky was clear now, mockingly blue. My old sedan rattled with every gust of wind, stuffed with trash bags and one small suitcase. The smell of wet plaster and mud filled the car. I told myself it was temporary, just until the insurance came through. Just until I could find a small place of my own. Michael lived in River North, in one of those modern glass towers you only ever see in magazines. When I pulled up, the doorman gave me a look that made me feel small, like I didn't belong there. He handed me a visitor badge, and for a moment, I felt like an intruder in my own child's life. Michael opened the door before I knocked. For a moment, my heart lifted. He had Thomas's eyes, that same shade of blue that once made me fall in love. "Mom," he said softly, stepping aside. His tone was careful, measured, like every word had been rehearsed. At first it was fine. He showed me to the guest room. White walls, spotless sheets. His wife, Isabel, offered a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. Days passed. Then little things started to change. My teacup disappeared from the counter. My laundry was accidentally moved from the dryer before it was done. My stories about Thomas were met with sighs. And then one evening, while I was setting the table, Isabel said it. That single sentence that cut deeper than any storm ever could. "Lorraine, you've been here 3 weeks. Maybe it's time you think about other arrangements." Other arrangements. That night I lay awake, staring at the city lights outside the window. How quickly you become a burden to the very people you gave your life to. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had survived a tornado, only to find myself unwelcome in my own son's home. So I decided something. If I was no longer wanted, I would leave, but not quietly. I went through my savings, what was left after the storm. I made one phone call to an old friend from the library board, a man named Carl Jensen. He managed the community housing grants for seniors. By the end of the week, a small one-bedroom apartment overlooking the park was mine. Before I left Michael's place, I cooked one last dinner. Roast lamb, just the way he loved it as a boy. I set the table with the good china Isabel never used. When the meal was ready, I placed an envelope by Michael's plate. Inside, every insurance document, every settlement form, and a note written in my own shaky hand. It said, "You once told me, Michael, that storms show us what's strong enough to stay. Now I know. What to let go of, I didn't wait for them to read it." I walked out that night, the city wind catching my scarf like a banner. Behind me, I could almost hear Thomas's voice, soft, approving. Now, when I wake up, I make my...
The apartment gleamed. White furniture, polished wood floors, art pieces that screamed money but not warmth, and then, she appeared, Tessa. 52, sleek ponytail. Silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. She smiled, thinly, but her eyes were cold. "Lorraine, how awful about your house," she said, glancing at the trash bags by my feet that I sat on the edge of their perfect white sofa, terrified I might leave a stain. "It's just temporary," I explained quickly. "Until the insurance comes through. I can help with meals, laundry. I'll stay out of the way." Michael didn't sit beside me. He lowered himself into the armchair across from me, folded hands, business posture. That distance said more than his words ever could. "The thing is, Mom," he began carefully, "Tessa and I have been talking. We value our privacy here. This is our sanctuary." I blinked at him, certain I had misheard. Privacy? "Michael, I lost everything yesterday. I don't need space, I need family." Tessa leaned forward, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. The tone people use with a confused child. "We just think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. There are lovely extended stay hotels near the Magnificent Mile. Very safe, very clean. They even have kitchenettes." My chest tightened. "And how am I supposed to pay for that?" I asked quietly. "The insurance money won't come for weeks." Michael shifted. His eyes avoided mine. "I can give you a few hundred to get started. A few hundred. As if decades of motherhood, of sacrifice, of scraped knees and sleepless nights, could be bought out with pocket change." I stood then, my knees aching, my dignity unraveling. "So that's it?" I whispered. "Your mother doesn't belong in your sanctuary?" Neither of them spoke. The silence between us was louder than the storm that had torn my home apart. I drove away from River North with 3 trash bags rattling in the back seat and a heart heavier than any tornado could make it. The city skyline shimmered against the night sky, beautiful, distant, but to me, it looked like a wall of glass keeping me out. I parked first near Lower Wacker Drive, a stretch of concrete and darkness beneath the streets, where delivery trucks roared and shadows lingered. It was hidden enough that no one would look twice at an old sedan. That first night, I curled up in the driver's seat, Thomas's sweater draped across my chest. Every sound, the slam of a car door, the echo of footsteps, made me jolt awake. I ate stale crackers from my purse and sipped from a water bottle that tasted faintly of rust. I told myself it was only for one night. Tomorrow, Michael would call. He'd change his mind, but tomorrow came, and nothing changed. By the second night, the air turned damp and cold. I moved my car to a Walmart parking lot on the edge of Cicero, hoping to disappear among the overnight trucks. Inside the store, under fluorescent light, I washed my face in the bathroom sink, avoiding my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked hollow-eyed, hair tangled, shoulders slumped. I didn't recognize her. Where had she gone? The mother who once hosted birthday parties with balloons tied to every chair. The woman who made the best lemon bars on the block. Now, she was sleeping in her car, praying not to be seen. On the third night, I woke at 2 a.m. A sharp pain pierced my back, and tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. I pressed my hands to my mouth so no one would hear me cry. I thought of Michael as a little boy. The way he used to clutch my hand while crossing the street. The way he'd beg, "One more story, Mama, just one more." Where had that boy gone? When had he become a man who could turn his mother away into the cold? I rummaged through my purse, searching for tissues, and that's when I found it. A thin, faded business card tucked between old receipts and expired coupons. The edges were soft, worn from years of being carried at IT, was from a woman named Martha Lewis that we'd met years ago at a literacy conference in Springfield. She ran a small community center for displaced seniors, one of those rare places that didn't just offer charity, but dignity. That I stared at that card for a long time, my fingers trembling, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something inside me, not anger, not even hope, something steadier, resolve. You learn a lot about yourself when life strips everything away, when the people you love most turn their backs, and all that's left is you, your breath, your heartbeat, and your will to keep moving. That's when you realize what's truly yours, and what never really was. I turned the business card over in my hands, the ink faded but still legible. Martha Lewis, Director, Haven Center for Independent Seniors. That I remembered her smile, warm and steady, like she'd already lived through every storm life could summon. That I hesitated. Pride is a strange thing. That it keeps you standing when the world knocks you down, but it can also stop you from reaching for the hand that might pull you up. Still, I was too tired to pretend anymore. That night, I called the number. The next morning, a gentle voice answered. Lorraine Hayes? Of course I remember you, Martha said. You get yourself here. We'll figure out the rest. When I arrived at the Haven Center, it wasn't much to look at, an old brick building tucked between a church and a shuttered grocery store, but inside, it was warm. People smiled. They asked questions that didn't sting. They didn't see a burden. They saw a woman who had survived. Within a week, I had a small studio of my own, modest, but mine. That a twin bed, a kitchenette, a window that faced a little garden of marigolds and basil. Every morning, I'd brew tea, watch the sunrise, and breathe without fear of being in the way. And slowly, the ache inside me began to harden into something else. Martha ran a weekly life skills circle for residents, mostly widows, veterans, and women like me who had been discarded by the people they'd raised. We'd sit in a circle of folding chairs, sipping coffee, sharing stories that began in heartbreak and ended in laughter. One afternoon, Martha asked me to help with a grant proposal. When she found out I'd been a librarian, she smiled. Perfect, she said. You have the kind of mind that remembers the details others forget. Working again felt like waking up after a long sleep, and while sorting through records and budgets, I realized something startling. Many seniors, just like me, had lost everything to storms, fires, and tragedies, but the difference wasn't what they lost. It was who they had afterward. Family didn't always mean blood. Sometimes, it meant the ones who refused to let you disappear. That realization changed me. But it also lit a quiet fire inside, because while I was rebuilding, Michael and Tessa were thriving. That I knew from the local paper. They just purchased another property near Lake Geneva. Michael had given an interview about building a life of stability and grace. I nearly laughed when I read it, stability and grace. While his own mother slept in her car. That I folded the newspaper and placed it beside my tea. That's when I decided that if life had taken everything from me, I'd use what was left, my time, my words, my wit, to take something back. It started small. Martha and I began organizing reading drives for displaced seniors, collecting donations, books, even household items. We made calls, filled out paperwork, spoke at local events, and soon enough, local reporters began covering our work. They loved the story. Widowed librarian turns loss into hope. It spread faster than I could have imagined. A month later, the Haven Center received its largest grant in history. The city council invited me to speak at a charity dinner downtown, one of those fancy events with soft lighting, white tablecloths, and too many forks. Guess who sat at the sponsors' table? Michael and Tessa, representing Hayes and Associates Real Estate. When they saw me step up to the microphone, I could feel the shock ripple through them. Michael's hand froze halfway to his glass. Tessa's smile faltered, then vanished entirely. I looked right at them, not with bitterness, but with the calm of a woman who had already survived worse. I began my speech. I spoke about the storm that took my home, the loneliness that followed, and the kindness of strangers who became family. I spoke about rebuilding, not houses, but dignity. And then, I said this. Sometimes, life tests us not by what we lose, but by who still stands beside us when we do. And sometimes, the storm shows us that not everyone who shares your blood deserves your heart. The audience rose in applause. Michael couldn't look at me. Tessa pretended to clap. But I didn't need their approval anymore. That was my storm's true gift, freedom. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Michael. A few lines of awkward apologies, wrapped in excuses. I read it once, then tucked it between the pages of my wedding album, not out of forgiveness, but remembrance. Because forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean letting someone back. It means choosing peace over poison. Now, every morning, I still make my tea at 3 o'clock sharp. The marigolds outside my window sway in the breeze, bright as hope, and sometimes I whisper to myself, the storm didn't destroy me. It revealed me. Because the most powerful revenge is not anger. It's living with grace when the world expected you to break. The day I called Martha Lewis, I thought I was just asking for help. What I didn't know was that call would change everything. The Haven Center gave me more than a roof and a warm bed. It gave me purpose, and in that purpose, I found a quiet, simmering power I didn't know I still had. Martha used to say, some storms tear through your house, Lorraine, and some tear through your heart, but either way, when the winds settle, you get to choose what you rebuild. And I chose to rebuild me. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into the center's work, writing grants, helping organize community events, and cataloging donations. People started calling me Miss Lorraine, the librarian with the silver hair and the sharp memory. But while I smiled and served tea, inside me something darker began to form. Not hatred, but a deep, cold awareness. I realized my son and his wife didn't just turn me away, they erased me. And when you erase a mother, you create a woman with nothing left to lose. It started one morning when I overheard Martha on the phone. She was frustrated. Apparently, a big development company was trying to buy out the Haven Center's land. They wanted to tear it down and turn it into luxury condos. When she said the name of the company, my heart stopped. Hayes and Associates Real Estate. My son's company. My son, Michael. I sat there, gripping my teacup until it cracked. So that was it. While I was rebuilding my life brick by brick, he was preparing to bulldoze the only home that had taken me in. That's when I stopped being just a survivor. That's when I became something else. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Revenge, I've learned, is not a thing you shout. It's something you whisper, until it echoes in their life so loudly they can't sleep. I began to gather information. Old librarian habits die hard. I researched Hayes and Associates, their investors, their development permits. Every night, I sat in my little apartment under a dim lamp, surrounded by printouts and sticky notes, like I was back in the stacks. Except this time, the story I was cataloging was my own, and what I found made my hands tremble. Michael had falsified several property appraisals to secure low-cost buyouts from vulnerable owners, mostly widows and retirees. People like me. He was profiting off desperation, off loss. That's when the rage stopped feeling like pain, and started feeling like purpose. I waited. I watched. And when the Haven Center received a notice of intent to purchase, I made my move. Using my background in records and documentation, I quietly assembled a file, emails, appraisal discrepancies, even bank transfers that linked directly back to Michael's office. But I didn't send it to the police, not yet. That would have been too easy. Too clean. I sent it to someone hungrier. A young journalist named Clara Evans. A woman I'd met at one of our reading drives, curious and sharp as a blade. When she asked why I wanted to expose them, I told her the truth. Because sometimes, the people who teach you to build a home are the same ones who will sell the ground beneath your feet. The article dropped 2 weeks later. Front page, Hayes and Associates under investigation for real estate fraud. By noon, the news had spread across every local channel. Reporters camped outside their glass tower in River North, clients pulled their investments, and by sundown, my son's empire, built on arrogance and greed, was crumbling. I watched it unfold from the Haven Center's common room, surrounded by people who had once been broken too. When they cheered, I didn't. I just sat there quietly, stirring my tea. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet sigh of justice, whispered between sips of Earl Grey. That evening, my phone rang. Michael, his voice trembled through the receiver. Mom, what did you do? I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the silence on his end. the sound of a man finally understanding what it feels like to lose everything. You tried to destroy the one place that saved me, I said softly, and you thought no one would notice. But I did that. I always notice. He began to cry, real, helpless sobs that sounded too much like the little boy he once was, and for a moment, my heart ached. But then I remembered that cold night in my car, the way his wife looked at my trash bags like garbage. I taught you how to love, Michael, I whispered. You chose to forget. I just reminded you. Then I hung up. 2 months later, the state froze his assets, Tessa filed for divorce, and Michael, well, he moved back to Plainfield, not far from where my old house once stood, except now, he lived in a rented apartment, across from the rebuilt Haven Center. Sometimes I see him sitting on a park bench, watching us through the fence that he never comes in, and I never wave. But one day, I left a small brown envelope on that bench. Inside, I placed Thomas's old watch, and a note that said only, "Some things you can buy, others, you earn back." People think revenge is about getting even, that it's not, that it's about balance, restoring the weight of what was taken from you. Michael lost his business, that I lost a son, but I gained something he'll never have again, peace. Now, when I sip my tea at 3 o'clock, I look out the window of the Haven Center at the marigolds swaying in the wind, and I remember the storm. That it didn't destroy me, that it defined me. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one holding the match. The kitchen smelled of cedar and lilies, fresh lilies. The bouquet Adrian had bought that morning, still bright against the marble counter, their fragrance mingled with the faint smoke from the fireplace, soft and steady, like the rhythm of my own breathing. The phone pressed cold against my ear. "Someone who doesn't see me as a burden," I said quietly. There was silence on the other end, long, deliberate. Then Michael's voice broke through, hesitant, controlled. "Mom, I think we should talk. Maybe you could stay in our guest room after all. Tessa and I have been rethinking things." The words should have warmed me. They didn't. They chilled me straight to the bone. Where was this generosity when I was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, clutching my purse under a blanket? A few days later, Michael and Tessa came to dinner. Tessa's smile was bright enough to blind, her perfume too sweet, her laughter just a touch too rehearsed. She carried a gift bag, candles wrapped in delicate tissue paper. The kind of gift meant to look thoughtful but cost nothing of the heart. The table. Adrian carved the roast with quiet precision. Michael, ever the performer, steered every topic toward business. "Real estate must be fascinating," he said, sipping his wine. "I handle insurance portfolios myself. Maybe we could explore some synergies." Adrian only nodded politely. He didn't need to say a word. His eyes told me he understood everything, the flicker in his jaw, the stillness of his hands. He'd dealt with men like Michael all his life. Later, after they left, Adrian closed the door softly and turned to me. His voice was calm, but a thread of steel ran beneath it. "I know exactly what your son is after, Lorraine," he said, "and we need to decide how to handle it." A week later, he told me he'd invited Michael and Tessa back for dinner. My stomach sank, but Adrian's eyes held mine, steady and sure. "It's time," he said simply. "We need clarity." They arrived like they were stepping into a boardroom, Michael in a tailored gray suit, his armor, Tessa in black silk, diamonds at her ears catching the light like tiny knives. She handed me another gift bag, this time, gourmet chocolates, "just a small token," she said, sugar-coating every word. I set it aside, unopened. We ate Mariah's roast beef in thick silence. Michael talked about traffic, about Chicago's booming housing market. Adrian only smiled faintly, saying little. When the dessert plates were cleared, he folded his hands on the table. "I want to discuss Lorraine," he said evenly, "and the way you've treated her." Michael's shoulders stiffened. "I don't understand." "You do?" Adrian said quietly, his voice sharp as glass. "When she lost everything in Plainfield, she came to you, her own son, and you turned her away." Tessa's smile faltered. Michael's face flushed a deep, angry red. "We thought it would be better that way," Tessa murmured. "Better for whom?" Adrian's tone hardened. "Certainly not for Lorraine. She slept in her car while you enjoyed your sanctuary." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt my pulse in my throat, pounding so loudly I thought it might echo through the room. but I didn't interrupt. Not this time. That I wanted to hear him say it all. Adrian leaned back slightly, his presence filling the room like thunder before a storm. Now, suddenly, your interest in her well-being has returned. You ask about my business, my assets, my future. Let me be very clear. Lorraine doesn't need your approval, your conditions, or your protection. What she needs is love, and if you can't offer that, then you have no place here. Michael's voice rose, brittle with anger. Are you saying I don't care about my own mother? Adrian's reply was soft, but devastating. I'm saying you care more about what you think she might inherit than about her happiness. That isn't love, Michael. That's opportunism. Tessa shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us, and that's when I finally spoke. The night of the tornado, I began, my voice trembling. I called you. That I begged for a place to stay. That I told you the house was gone, that your father's memory, everything, was scattered across the street, and you said it wasn't a good time. Michael looked down, jaw tight. That he didn't deny it. That he couldn't. I slept in that car for 2 nights, I continued, while you and Tessa were posting vacation photos in Maui. Tessa opened her mouth to speak, but Adrian's hand came up, silencing her gently. You taught me something that week, Michael, I said softly. You taught me what it means to be invisible, even to your own blood. He tried to laugh it off, a brittle, defensive sound. Mom, you're being dramatic. But Adrian leaned forward, his tone like ice. She's being honest. And for a moment, just a moment, Michael's mask cracked. That I saw the boy he once was, scared and proud, buried under years of greed and guilt. Then he looked up, and the boy was gone. After that night, I knew what had to be done, the invitations, the dinners, the sudden interest in family. It wasn't kindness. That it was calculation. Michael wanted access to Adrian's company, his accounts, his influence. And what better way than through his aging mother, the woman he'd once left behind in a storm. So I did what mothers rarely do. That I stopped protecting him. I started digging. Old habits die hard, and librarians, even retired ones, have a way of finding what others buried. That I traced his development deals, his company filings, his partners. What I found made my blood run cold. Fraud, fabricated appraisals, fake signatures, and worse, properties bought cheap from widows and seniors who'd lost their homes in the same tornado that took mine, the same people he'd told me were beyond saving. That's when my grief turned to clarity, and my forgiveness turned to fire. That's where I'll stop, right on the edge of her revenge ignition point, where the story pivots from sorrow into calculated retribution.
You needed a son. You chose yourself. That's something I will never forget. The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Michael's face twisted, caught between shame and fury. He shoved back his chair, muttering something about being insulted, and stormed toward the door. Tessa followed, her heels clicking like gunshots across the tile. When the door slammed shut, the house went still again. And then, my phone buzzed. A message from the Plainfield Land Trust office. Subject line, redevelopment notice. I frowned, opening it. The message made my hands tremble. Greater redevelopment approved. Priority granted to displaced residents. Project overseen by Coal Redevelopment. I turned to Adrian, confusion and awe flooding through me. You didn't tell me. He met my eyes, calm but tender. Greater than, I didn't want you to think it was pity. My firm won the bid fairly, but I made sure the plan honored the families who lost everything. That includes you, Lorraine. Your right to return is protected. Tears blurred my vision. The same man who had once promised me the world as a teenage boy was now giving me back a future I thought the tornado had erased. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, I stood in Adrian's backyard overlooking Lake Michigan. The garden was ablaze with autumn, crimson maples, gold leaves spinning in the breeze, rows of white chairs lined neatly beneath the open sky. No choir, no grand cathedral, no crowd to impress, just a handful of people who mattered. Maria, the housekeeper who had become my friend. Thomas, Adrian's longtime business partner, and the minister who'd known him since college. I wore a simple navy dress. Adrian stood tall beside me in a charcoal suit, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. When he took my hands, I felt 17 again, standing at the quarry with the boy who had once sworn he'd come back for me. We exchanged vows in quiet voices, and when the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Adrian kissed me gently, reverently, as though time itself had been waiting for that moment. Michael came alone. He stood awkwardly at the back, watching, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he approached me, shifting from foot to foot like a boy caught between pride and regret. "Mom," he said softly, voice rough, "I'm sorry." For everything I touched his arm, greater than "I forgive you," I said. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Love me because I'm your mother, not because of what you think I have. He nodded, eyes downcast, and for once, there was no argument, just silence, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something real. That night, Adrian and I sat on the porch, the lake glittering beneath the stars. I leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his hand in mine. "The tornado took my house," I said quietly, "my furniture, my rose garden. But it also stripped away illusions. It showed me who my son really was, and it brought me back to the man I was always meant to find." Adrian smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes," he said, "destruction clears the ground for new foundations." The words settled deep inside me. I looked out at the dark water, my heart finally steady. At 66, I had learned something simple but profound. You are never too old to rebuild. You are never too broken for love to find you again. When I look back now, I realize the tornado was only part of the storm. The greater storm came afterward, being turned away by my own child, realizing that sometimes the people you expect to shelter you are the very ones who shut the door. But I also learned this: loss doesn't just destroy, it reveals. It clears the ground so truth can take root. Adrian taught me that dignity isn't measured by what you own, but by how you stand when life knocks you down. And that love, when it's real, doesn't pity, it rebuilds. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: you are never too old to start again, never too broken to be loved again. And sometimes the storm isn't sent to destroy you, but to clear your path home. Pause. Now tell me, what lesson did you take from this story, and where are you watching from tonight?